Hi guys, today I'm going to show you how to solve quadratic equations. The main thing when you are solving a quadratic equation is to make sure that before you start to solve it, it must be equal to 0. The equation must be equal to 0 before you start to solve it. In some questions it may not be equal to 0, and if that happens then you will need to rearrange the equation to make it equal to 0. There are three methods that you need to know to solve equations, quadratic equations. So you have got solving by factorising, solving by using the quadratic formula, and solving by completing the square. So three separate methods that you will need to know to solve a quadratic equation. Now in the GCSE exam they may ask you for a specific method. They may say solve by factorising, solve by quadratic formula, or solve by completing the square, or they may say solve, give your answers to 2 decimal places. Well, if it asks you to give your answer to either 2 decimal places or 3 significant figures, or something that suggests there will be a decimal, they are actually saying in there that you need to either use the quadratic formula or solve by completing the square. So it is important. Usually factorising will be on a non-calculator paper. It could be on a calculator paper. All of these could pop up on either paper, so it is important that you're able to do it with or without a calculator. If it was on a non-calculator paper and it wants you to use the quadratic formula, it will ask you to leave it in exact form, which means you will leave it with the square root in, but I'll explain that when we get there. So the first method that we're going to look at is solving by factorising. So here's my first quadratic equation. It is equal to 0, so I can just go ahead and factorise. I need 2 numbers that multiply to make 28 and 2 numbers that add to make 11. First 2 that I'm going to go for is 2 and 14. When I add those together they make 16, not 11. So I'm going to try 4 and 7. They do add to make 11. So what I've got here when I factorise this is x plus 4, x plus 7. Now we know from our expanding brackets methods that we've done previously, we know that this bracket is multiplying this bracket, and therefore whatever number this comes out at multiplied by whatever number this comes out at, the answer is 0, which means either this bracket x plus 4 has to be equal to 0, or we could have x plus 7 equals 0. Because if this bracket is 0, then I've got 0 multiplied by a number gets me 0, or if this bracket is equal to 0, I've got a number multiplied by 0, which also gets me 0. So now that I've got that part, solving means find the value of x, and therefore all I need to do is to just subtract 4 from both sides on this equation. So I get x equals -4, and on this one I need to subtract 7 on both sides to get me x equals -7. So the two answers for this question to solve this quadratic is x equals -4 and x equals -7. Second example for you, I have got 3x squared minus 13x minus 10 is equal to 0. So this time I'm going to need to do 3 times -10 gets me -30. So I need 2 numbers that multiply to make -30 and add to make -13. So because I'm multiplying to make a negative number, I know one needs to be positive and one needs to be negative. So -10 and 3, that would add to get me -7, so that doesn't work. Let's go 15 and -2. Adding that would get me positive 13. I want -13, but I'm along the right lines. So if I go -15 and 2, that does add to make negative 13. Now to split that negative 13x into minus 15x and positive 2x. 3x squared is there, and the minus 10. It is still equal to 0. Factorising the first two terms, pulling out the highest factor, I've got 3x, open bracket, x minus 5, close my bracket. Now when I factorise the last two terms, I know that the bracket that it's going to factorise is going to have to be the same as this one. So I know it's got to be x minus 5 here. What multiplied by x minus 5 is going to get me 2x minus 10. Well, if I multiply that by 2, 2x minus 10, perfect. So to factorise, I have got 3x plus 2, x minus 5. Just as I did with the previous example, I've got two numbers multiplying to make 0. I'm going to show that each bracket could be equal to 0. So I'm going to have 3x plus 2 equals 0 and rearrange it. So minus 2 from both sides, 3x equals negative 2. Divide by 3 on both sides, I get x equals minus 2/3. I could also have x minus 5 equals 0. So I'd have to add 5 to both sides. So x is equal to 5. One more example on this, and that is x squared plus 2x plus 4 is equal to 7. Now this time you can see that it is not equal to 0, so I need to rearrange it. Subtract 7 on both sides. I get x squared plus 2x minus 3 equals 0. Two numbers that multiply to make negative 3 and add to make 2. 1, negative 3. No. Negative 1 and 3 does add to make 2. So I've got x minus 1, x plus 3 inside my brackets, and then just make each of these brackets equal to 0. Add 1 to both sides, I get x is equal to 1. Minus 3 from both sides, negative 3. There are my two answers. Moving on to my second method, solving by using the quadratic formula. Now I've written it out here for you, and just to talk you through, this is the generic format of a quadratic equation. Ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, and the formula is given by x, or whatever the variable is that you are solving for, is equal to the negative of the value of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 multiplied by whatever the value of a is multiplied by c all over 2a. So you do need to make sure that when you type this into your calculator that you do include the minus b on the top of your fraction. So first question is going to be x squared minus 5x minus 9 equals to 0. Now I would just write on the side a equals 1, b equals negative 5, and c equals negative 9. Once I've got this, it's going to be really easy to substitute into the formula to solve it. So I know x is equal to negative b, so negative of negative 5 is actually going to be positive 5, plus or minus the square root of negative 5 squared. And please, when you have a negative that you square, please make sure you do put it in brackets. Minus 4 multiplied by a, which is 1, multiplied by c, which is negative 9, and that's the square root of all of that, all over 2 times a. So x is equal to 5 plus or minus the square root of 25, which is that minus 5 squared, minus 4 times 1 times minus 9 gets me positive 36, because that's negative and negative, all over 2 times 1, which is 2. X is equal to 5 plus or minus the square root of 61 all over 2. And now what I do is just type into my calculator this. Now I can't type this part into my calculator. I am going to have to do it separately. So I'm going to have 5 plus the square root of 61 all over 2. So that gets me my first value, which when I just press SD gets me x equals 6.40512438, which I am going to round to, let's go 3 significant figures. And then what I need to do now is, I've done the positive one, I now need to do the negative one. So I'm just going to go back to my calculator and I'm just going to press the across arrow, and then once I get to the other side of the plus, just press delete and put in the negative, press equals, and I get the negative solution. Press SD, I get x equals minus 1.405124838, which to 3 significant figures again is minus 1.41. And there you go, there are the 2 x values for that question. 2 more examples on this. So I have got 7x squared plus 2x is equal to 3. The equation is not equal to 0, so I will need to rearrange this, subtracting 3 from both sides. So I get 7x squared plus 2x minus 3 equals 0. Write out my values of a, b and c. A equals 7, b equals 2 and c equals negative 3. What I will do is I will put the formula here so we have got it to refer to. Fold that over, we can look at it here. So I have got x equals minus b, b is 2, so negative 2, plus or minus the square root of b squared, so 2 squared, minus 4 times 7 times negative 3, square root over all of that, all over 2a, so 2 multiplied by 7. What I'm now going to do is I'm just going to type it straight into my calculator. Remember, at one point you will need to go back and change the add to a subtract once you've got your first x value. So when I type this in, I get negative 2 plus the square root of 2 squared, which is 4, minus 4 times 7 times negative 3, all over 2 times 7. Please make sure you check carefully when you type into your calculator that it looks exactly how it should do that you've written in your formula. Here you can absolutely write in 2 squared. I know what 2 squared is, so I just wrote in the 4. Press equals, and this is my value. So I know that when I did, can I go back here? Yes, when I did this, I know that this actually in my formula is plus or minus at this stage. So what I can do once I've pressed equals, I know I can say that's minus 1 plus or minus the square root of 22 all over 7, and then my 2x values. That's obviously my first one. So press SD, I get 0.52720222514, which to three significant figures is 0.527. And now what I can do is if I just go across, change my add to a subtract, I now get my negative value, so it's negative here. Press SD, I get x equals minus 0.8129165371, which to three significant figures is negative 0.813. Okay, my last example for using the quadratic formula is 4 plus x minus 2x squared equals 0. Now you can see here that the x squared is at the end. This is still the value of a. Please do not get confused that because this is at the end that this is now the value of c. Remember, the value of a is always the coefficient of x squared. It's always the number in front of the x squared. So writing out my values, a is negative 2, b, now we can't see a number in front of there, however there is an x there, therefore the coefficient must be 1, and the value of c, which is the number on its own, is 4. Using my formula, x equals minus b, so negative 1, plus or minus the square root of b squared, so 1 squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a, 2 times negative 2, and typing that into my calculator. Let's see, there we go. Minus 1 plus or minus the square root of 1 squared minus 4 times negative 2 times 4 all over 2 times negative 2. I get my first value, x equals negative 1.186140662, which is minus 1.19 to three significant figures, and then just going back and changing my plus into a minus, I get x equals 1.6861406662, which is 1.69 to three significant figures. Okay, finally solving by completing the square. So I have got x squared plus 6x minus 2 equals 0. So complete the square on this first of all. I'm going to end up with x plus 3 all squared, because the 3 comes from half of this number. Take away 3 squared, which is 9. Take away 2, because that's the 2 that's there, and we know that is equal to 0. So I'm just going to tidy this up. X plus 3 all squared minus 11 is equal to 0. Now to solve it, I'm going to add 11 to both sides. So I get x plus 3 all squared is equal to 11. I now need to do the inverse of squaring, which is square root. So I'm going to square root both sides. So x plus 3 is equal to, now I can either have the positive or the negative square root of 11. That's because a positive number times a positive number gets me a positive number, or I could have a negative number multiplied by a negative number giving me a positive number. So that's why we have the positive and negative value of the square root of 11, and now I just need to subtract 3 from both sides to get me x equals minus 3 plus or minus the square root of 11. And now all I need to do is type this into my calculator. So minus 3 plus the square root of 11, whoops, gets me my first x value 0.316624790, which is 0.317 to 3 significant figures. Or I'm going to have minus 3 minus the square root of 11, which is going to get me x equals minus 6.31662479 minus 6.32 to 3 significant figures. Okay, another example is, let's have a little look at this one. Try and kill two birds with one stone in this question. I'm going to have a coefficient of x squared, and I'm also going to make it not equal to 0. So what I would do is rearrange it to make it equal to 0. So subtract 1 from both sides. So I get 2x squared minus 12x minus 1 is equal to 0. I'm then going to complete the square on this. Now this is the slightly harder one. So if you haven't yet had a look at the second video from completing the square, you might need to have a little look at that first of all. So I need to pull out the factor of 2 first of all, which gets me x squared minus 6x, and then minus 1. I'm now going to complete the square on this part that's inside my brackets. So I'm going to have x minus 3 all squared minus 9. That's inside my brackets and is being multiplied by 2. Subtract 1 equals 0. And now I'm just going to get rid of those green brackets and expand. So 2 brackets x minus 3 all squared minus 18 minus 1 equals 0. Tidy it up. Minus 18 take away 1 gets me minus 19. And now I just need to rearrange it just as I did previously. So add the 19 to both sides. So I get 2 brackets x minus 3 all squared is equal to 19. I'm going to divide by 2 now. I'm going to divide by this coefficient in front of the brackets. So I get x minus 3 all squared, let's write that in for you, equals 19 over 2. And I am just going to leave it as a fraction, 19 over 2. Now I need to square root both sides. So I get x minus 3 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 19 over 2. And then finally I just need to add 3 to both sides to get me x equals 3 plus or minus the square root of 19 over 2. And that's when I said earlier that it could be on a non-calculator paper. That is how you would leave your final answer, just in that exact form. You're not expected to work out what the value of this is. Obviously I'm just going to type it into my calculator to give you the 2 decimal values. I'm going to have to do them separately here like this. So typing this in, I get 3 plus square root of 19 over 2, which gets me 6.082207, which is 6.08 to 3 significant figures, and 3 minus the square root of 19 over 2, which gets me minus 0.082207, which is negative 0.0822 to 3 significant figures. One final example for you, and that is 3 minus 4x minus x squared equals 0. Now personally, when I'm completing the square, I would want the x squared to be my first term. I find it a lot more easy or I find it a lot easier, sorry, to complete the square when I've got my x squared as my first term. So all I'm going to do is just rearrange this to minus x squared minus 4x plus 3 equals 0. I'm just going to pull out that factor of -1 in those first two terms, which leaves me with x squared plus 4x plus 3 equals 0. Complete the square of the bit inside my brackets here, so I get x plus 2 all squared minus 4. I need to remember that I should have done those brackets in green really, that is being multiplied by -1, and I need to add 3 here because that's that bit there. Multiply out the green brackets, so I get negative in front of the brackets, x plus 2 all squared, -1 times -4 is going to get me plus 4 here, and then obviously I've got my plus 3. I have got negative x plus 2 all squared plus 7 equals 0. I'm going to subtract 7 from both sides, so I get negative x plus 2 all squared equals -7, and I'm going to divide by -1 to get rid of this negative here, so I get x plus 2 all squared, -7 divided by -1 is going to get me +7. Square root both sides, x plus 2 is plus or minus square root of 7, and then subtract 2 from both sides gets me x equals -2 plus or minus root 7. Again, quite happy to leave it like that, or you can type it into your calculator to get the decimal values. Just a note on this one. At this stage, there are many different ways that you can do this. This is just one of the ways that I've decided to do it. You could have, at this stage, decided to add to both sides the x plus 2 all squared bracket. So you would have been left with 7 equals x plus 2 all squared. I just like to keep it all on this side of my equal sign, but it's totally down to personal preference. And yes, hopefully that will help you to solve quadratic equations. Thank you.